Welcome to the new video of NeuroPhilos. Get ready to dive into a gripping tale that will leave you breathless, thinking, and inspired. Whether you're here for the mystery, the drama, or the unexpected twists, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. Let's begin. Addiction as a cry of pain. You are not weak and you are not broken. The compulsion that grips you, the emptiness that returns like a tide, is not madness or moral failure. It is pain. And pain, however chaotic it feels, has an origin. It leaves traces, nervous systems trained to brace, hearts practiced in hiding, eyes that scan rooms for exits and threats. If you listen closely, the ache you call addiction is not a verdict on your character. It is a message from the wounded places asking to be heard. Carl Jung, mapmaker of the inner world, suggested that many so-called vices are not simply bad habits, but longing gone astray. In a renowned letter to the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, he wrote that addiction is a frustrated spiritual quest, a soul reaching for the infinite and grasping a bottle, a pill, a screen, a rush. He named this conflict spiritus contra spiritum, the true spirit at war with the false spirit. The craving is not for the substance. The craving is for meaning, contact, breath, relief. Physician Gabor Maté reframed the question. The issue is not why the addiction, but why the pain. This single pivot changes everything. Instead of condemning yourself for repetition, you begin to ask what the repetition is protecting. Anesthesia impersonates pleasure, but its job is numbness, silencing what feels unbearable for one more hour. When the world has taught your body that safety is scarce and love conditional, short relief can masquerade as life itself. Look honestly, and you may recognize the pattern. It is there in the late-night scroll, the binge you promised would be the last, the overwork disguised as ambition, the hookup that keeps loneliness quiet until morning. Different costumes, same script, escape. Yet beneath every exit lies a door back to the same room, the room where pain waits, patient and unsolved. This is not a lecture. It is a mirror. If you have been running, consider the possibility that the chase is a compass. The behaviors you despise may be pointing at the wound you refuse to name. Calling addiction a disease sometimes helps. Calling it a symptom goes further. Symptoms do not make you defective. They make you understandable. There is a path out, but not by leaping over the ache. The first step is simple, not easy. Acknowledge that the craving is a messenger. You do not have to romanticize suffering to treat it with respect. You can say, something in me hurts, and I have been trying to carry it alone. You can say, anesthesia kept me alive until now, and now I want more than survival. If you accept that pain is not the end, but the invitation, a different horizon appears. Relief is not only in the bottle, the click, the purchase. Relief can begin in recognition, in breath, in the quiet practice of returning to yourself. Understanding addiction is understanding yourself. And from that understanding, a new kind of courage begins to grow. The courage to stay, to feel, to heal. You are not being asked to be perfect, only present. Begin here, with one honest breath, one sentence, one pause before the old doorway. The tide will still come, but you will have learned how to stand and answer it. The kingdom of hungry ghosts. Beneath every form of addiction lies a void. It does not matter whether the compulsion takes the shape of drugs, alcohol, sex, shopping, endless scrolling, or overwork. The details change, but the engine is the same. A hunger that never quiets. Buddhism offers an ancient image for this condition, the realm of hungry ghosts. These beings are depicted with enormous stomachs and tiny throats, condemned to eternal starvation. No matter how much they consume, they cannot be filled. Gabor Maté adopts this metaphor for the addict's life, an insatiable craving for connection, for safety, for belonging, met only with substitutes that soothe for a moment and then abandon you emptier than before. The addict is not greedy in the way the world imagines. They are not chasing pleasure. They are chasing anesthesia, the drink, the pill, the gamble, the binge, all are attempts to soften a scream the conscious mind barely recognizes. This is why addiction is not truly about substances or behaviors. It is about pain. Pain that was never named, never soothed, never honored. The bottle or the screen is not the desire. It is a counterfeit solution. Think of a child who grows up feeling unseen or unloved. The body of that child remembers. Decades later, when loneliness creeps in or shame presses heavy, the nervous system still searches for the missing comfort. The substance or behavior arrives like an emotional prosthesis, standing in for the care that was absent. And though the relief is shallow and fleeting, the body clings to it. For an hour, a day, a night, the wound is silenced. But silence is not healing. Silence is only delay. The cycle is cruel because it masquerades as choice. From the outside, people judge. Why can't you just stop? But the inner reality is closer to possession than decision. The hunger does not negotiate, it demands. In this way, the addict resembles the hungry ghost. Mouth too small to receive nourishment, stomach too large to be satisfied. The tragedy is not in the craving itself, but in its misdirection. What is truly sought is not intoxication, but wholeness. This distinction matters. When you see addiction only as bad behavior, you condemn yourself to shame. But when you understand it as a symptom of unmet longing, you begin to treat it with compassion. Compassion does not mean indulgence. It means you stop fighting shadows and start listening to what the hunger is trying to say. And what it says is simple, if difficult. I want to belong. I want to be held. I want to feel safe enough to rest inside myself. These are not shameful needs. They are profoundly human ones. The addict's error is not in wanting too much, but in searching in the wrong places. If this describes you, let it be a mirror, not a sentence. You are not weak because you crave. You crave because you are alive and still reaching for what was missing. The work ahead is not to silence the hunger, but to redirect it, to seek connection instead of anesthesia, presence instead of escape. The kingdom of hungry ghosts is not your destiny. It is only a chapter, and like all chapters, it can be turned. The shadow within. Carl Jung believed addiction was never simply about substances, impulses, or so-called lack of willpower. To him, it was the sign of a soul in exile, a cry of the psyche searching for meaning, but unable to find it. Human beings cannot survive disconnected from their inner center. When that thread is broken, through trauma, repression, shame, or cultural conditioning, the psyche compensates. If it cannot find healthy symbolic outlets, it turns toward destructive substitutes. Thus, obsessions, compulsions, and addictions become the unconscious attempt to reconnect with something sacred, to feel whole, to taste transcendence, even for a fleeting moment. Jung once explained in a letter to Bill Wilson, the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, that for many the thirst for alcohol is not about drunkenness at all. It is an unconscious longing for a mystical experience, a state of transcendence. He named it spiritus contra spiritum, the true spirit against the false one. Alcohol, drugs, compulsive behaviors, these are poor imitations of the divine, shadow versions of the sacred. They give the illusion of relief, ecstasy, or peace. But what they truly reflect is the misplaced longing of the soul. Here is where the concept of the shadow enters. The shadow is not evil in itself. It is the collection of parts of ourselves we have repressed, denied, or hidden away. Anger we were not allowed to express, desires that were shamed, fears we were told to suppress, vulnerability we were punished for showing, sexuality, ambition, grief, power. If these were unwelcome in our family, culture, or faith, they were cast into the unconscious. But repressed content does not disappear. It lives on, whispering and pulling the strings from below consciousness. Addiction is often the shadow's distorted voice. What you refuse to face in daylight emerges at night as compulsion. Jung warned that what we do not make conscious returns in our lives as fate. That repeated behavior you swore you would abandon. The cycle you hate yet cannot stop. That is not weakness of discipline. That is the shadow demanding recognition. Think of it this way. Addiction is not an enemy, but a signal flare. It is the psyche saying, look here. There is something unintegrated that you are running from. The substance or behavior is not the problem in isolation. It is the doorway through which the shadow is trying to enter your awareness. The anger you swallowed becomes rage turned inward. The shame you never spoke becomes self-sabotage. The grief you buried becomes compulsive escape. Addiction contains, for a moment, the pressure of all that the conscious self refuses to confront. The tragedy is that we fight the symptom instead of the source. We shame the craving, starve the hunger, and tighten control, while the shadow grows darker and more powerful. Recovery, in Jung's vision, requires something far more difficult, turning toward what we fear. It requires allowing the shadow to be seen, integrated and embraced, not denied. Only then does it cease to rule from the dark. When you begin to understand this, you stop asking, "Why can't I stop?" and start asking, "What part of me is trying to be heard?" In that question lies the first real path toward freedom, the wound of disconnection. Before the first drink was poured, before the first pill was swallowed, before the first compulsive behavior took root, there was pain. Addiction never begins with the substance, it begins with the wound. Somewhere, long before adulthood, a child learned that the world was not safe, that love was conditional, that their feelings were too heavy for others to hold. Addiction, then, is not the cause of suffering but the adaptation to it, a creative, desperate attempt of the psyche to endure what once felt unendurable. Gabor Maté insists that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite is connection. And this truth is unsettling because it reframes addiction entirely. The addict is not seeking pleasure, they are seeking relief. Relief from loneliness that became chronic. Relief from the sense of being unworthy. Relief from the cold ache of not being held, seen, or accepted. These hungers are not born in adulthood. They are born in childhood, often in the earliest years, before words exist to describe them. Neuroscience shows how early experiences carve the pathways of the brain. A child nurtured with warmth, attunement, and presence develops circuits of trust and regulation. A child raised in neglect, chaos, or emotional abandonment develops circuits of hypervigilance, shame, and fear. The nervous system adapts to survive, but the cost is profound. What is missing, comfort, belonging, attunement, becomes the very thing the adult seeks endlessly in substances or behaviors. Addiction is, in this way, an emotional prosthesis. It provides for a fleeting moment what the inner child begged for but did not receive, a sense of calm, a false belonging, an illusion of control. But the comfort it delivers is fragile and temporary. The price rises with each use. The body of the addict carries memories the mind has long buried. Memories of being unseen, of holding in tears, of learning to smile while crumbling inside. These imprints live not in words but in muscle tension, in the racing heart, in the nervous system's quiet panic. This is why recovery cannot be reduced to willpower or abstinence. If the wound is ignored, the craving will return in another form, because the body remembers. Healing requires more than stopping the substance. It requires returning to the body where trauma resides. It requires acknowledging the pain that was never given space to breathe. Imagine addiction not as a disease, but as a survival strategy. It is the nervous system crying out, "I cannot hold this alone." When you see it this way, guilt loosens its grip, and shame begins to dissolve. You recognize that what kept you alive is now what keeps you trapped, and that recognition opens the door to compassion. But compassion is not enough on its own. Understanding the wound must be followed by the courage to face it. Jung reminded us, no tree grows to the sky unless its roots touch hell. To grow into wholeness, you must touch the roots. Descend into the darkness you have avoided, and meet the child within who still waits to be seen. Only by confronting this wound can the cycle of escape begin to break, and in that descent lies the beginning of transformation, the awakening. To speak of recovery as a straight climb toward light is a dangerous illusion. The truth is harsher and more liberating. Healing is not an ascent, but a descent. Carl Jung captured it with one of his most piercing insights. No tree grows to the sky without its roots touching hell. For the addict, this hell is not a metaphor. It is the raw experience of confronting one's own unconscious, facing the pain that was hidden behind years of anesthesia. Recovery begins the moment you stop running. For perhaps the first time, you turn toward the wound instead of numbing it. You recognize that the hunger that has haunted you cannot be fed with another drink, another click, another purchase. The void will not close through distraction. It will soften only when you allow yourself to hear it, to sit with it, to honor it. This act, facing instead of fleeing, is the threshold of awakening. Awakening does not mean perfection. It means honesty. It is the choice to lay down the weapons you've used against yourself, to stop waging war on your cravings and instead ask, what is this pain trying to teach me? Addiction ceases to be the enemy and becomes the messenger. The very substance or behavior that once destroyed you also points with painful precision to where healing is needed. It shows you where it hurts, where something was lost, where the inner child still bleeds. True freedom does not come only from abstaining. It comes from integration, from bringing the shadow out of exile and back into the light of consciousness. Jung taught that the soul does not seek perfection, but wholeness. To be whole means to embrace your wounds alongside your strengths, your shadows alongside your light. You are not healed by erasing your past, but by weaving it into a larger story, one where you no longer need to hide from yourself. Rebirth happens quietly. It is the moment you realize you no longer have to anesthetize every ache. It is the morning you sit in silence and feel your breath without panic. It is the night you face loneliness and discover it does not kill you. It is the fragile but growing awareness that you are more than your cravings, more than your failures, more than the shame you carried for years. You are the presence that observes it all and chooses differently, one small step at a time. Awakening does not happen in an instant. It unfolds slowly, built with patience, humility, and courage. You will stumble, you will ache, but each return to awareness is itself a victory. What once felt like exile begins to feel like a homecoming. And so recovery is not about becoming perfect, but about becoming real. It is the journey of learning to inhabit your own life again, not as someone broken, but as someone whole. You are not alone on this path. To seek awakening is to join the human story, the story of pain, descent, courage, and eventual return to the self. This is the true promise of recovery, not escape, but presence. Not numbness, but aliveness. Not perfection, but wholeness. And in that wholeness, freedom,